nights, just after I see a movie, I like to go get a piece of pie and talk about it. It's sort of a little tradition I have. Do you like to get pie after you see a good movie?
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to A Piece of Pie, the queer film podcast. I'm your host, Brian Rowe, and my contributors this week are Lauren and Matt. Say hi.
Hi.
Hello.
I'm so excited for this episode, Matt, because this was your idea. This was you brought Mary, Queen of Scots to my attention, and we discussed pairing it. And I don't remember what you said that made me think, well, that sounds like The Favorite. But you said something.
Yeah, well, yeah, sure. So there's the obvious comparison of they're both period pieces. They're both big dress dramas that have queer themes in them. Granted, they treat their queer themes in very, very different manners.
Yeah.
But they're also sort of, I'm not claiming to be any kind of paragon of historical accuracy here, but I get the sense that both of them are sort of revisionist takes on history.
Yeah.
Or if not revisionist, at least looking at history through a very specifically modern lens. And again, they do that in different ways. I don't want to get too into it right off the bat, but I was just going to say, I am so excited to talk about Mary, Queen of Scots. I can't stop thinking about this movie.
Well,
it's the weirdest thing ever.
I will cede it to you. Tell us about Mary, Queen of Scots. What's it about? And tell us. Let us know.
Yeah, so Hulu describes it as a feminist reimagining of the story of Mary Stuart and her cousin Queen Elizabeth of England. And Mary was, I think, exiled to France as a child, and then, she came back to Scotland to claim the throne, but she was illegitimate as a Catholic. And it's this big story of like two warring cousin queens, who has legitimate access to the throne, how did they get that? And the thing that interests me so much about this movie is that it's not particularly a great movie, but it's so close to being a great movie. And there's this, it's visually gorgeous. The cinematography is amazing. The set design, the costumes are fantastic. Margot Robbie and Saoirse Ronan are both really good in it. But the sort of the level of feminist reimagining that it's on is a very specifically 2008 thing. Like, it's a very neoliberal understanding of like a hashtag girl boss monarch queen. And you see this in the way that Mary is sort of reimagined as this like 21st century tolerance icon. They slap her with a gay best friend, which they exploit for both tragedy and sympathy, and then comedy and like all of these things. And, she has slumber parties with her chambermaids, like it feels like it, in some ways it almost feels like a Greta Gerwig movie, but it's not as good as I think a Greta Gerwig Mary, Queen of Scots would have been.
Yeah.
It's just really interesting. I look forward to getting into the aspects of the gay characters, but that's my spiel, is that it's a movie that has stuck in my head ever since I saw it, because it was like, well, that wasn't, that's not going to win Best Picture. And I don't think many people are really going to remember this. It's not going to linger in the zeitgeist for very long, but it was so almost something. And I'm just obsessed with that.
Yeah, it's I actually didn't know a lot about Mary Stuart, and I still don't, but a couple of years ago, Chicago Shakespeare did a play called Mary Stuart, and it wasn't a two-hander, but it almost was, where it was a lot of conversations between Elizabeth and Mary, who historically we don't know if they ever even met, but that play, and I understand Mary, Queen of Scots, is based on the assumption that they did at some point. And so I find the speculation around it, and the revisionist history very interesting. I find the feminist, I'm saying this with quotes, take interesting, and I do very much agree with you. It is very close to being a good movie. It's just shy of it.
Yeah, I was looking. I always like to read about these things on the movie database, and I was struck by. And I don't. I'm not a big user review guy because I don't know these people and whatever.
Yeah.
But I was struck by how all of the early reviews were really, really, really negative, and really, 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 really against that feminist slant. Right, because it's the internet. And I remember they hated it so much that it made me excited for it because I was like, oh, this is gonna be gonna be great. I agree with both of you. I thought it was gorgeously shot. Saoirse Ronan is always incredible.
Yeah,
she's so good.
I think she's the reason it feels like a Greta Gerwig movie. Because between Little Women and Lady Bird, she's become Greta Gerwig's, Johnny Depp.
Yeah.
Which I'm here for. I would have loved a Greta Gerwig take on this. Like I would have.
I think I hadn't even thought of that until Matthew, you brought it up, and I was like, oh shit, I would love a Greta Gerwig take. Like, yeah. Saoirse is. I'm not great at discerning what is a good Scottish accent and what is not. And also that is an incredibly hard dialect to do and do well. I thought hers was pretty decent. Like, yeah. Can I also say, speaking of Scottish actors, I recognized there's a scene late in the movie where David Tennant's character, is once again preaching about how Mary is a horrible person. The woman who starts the chant of like dirty whore or whatever it is, she is a Scottish stage actress who was in a trilogy of Shakespeare plays that became really well known in the UK. I was just like, Karen?
I had that moment, but I had it with David Tennant.
Yes!
I was gonna say the same thing.
Because I didn't know he was in it coming into this. Yeah, and it was the eyes, I think, that really gave it away.
It's the eyes, yeah, because David Tennant is one, and we can get into also Guy Pearce is in this movie.
Right.
Because I feel like Guy Pearce, like, it has that niche for himself now, where it's just like he's in all of these, like, because the King's Speech, and he's in this one too. And I always recognize Guy Pearce.
Mm-hmm. I
almost never recognize David Tennant, which is very strange. As much as he pops up on my social media, I should recognize him more. But I didn't until I was like, wait, where's David Tennant? Because I know he's in this. And I was like, oh, he's John Knox. Like, he's the guy who looks like Rasputin.
He's hiding behind the beard.
It took me a stupid amount of time to recognize him. And I mean, that being said, it took me a stupid amount of time to recognize him the second time around because I forgot he was in the movie. The first time, I didn't even notice. And then the credits rolled. I was like, where the fuck was David Tennant in this? And I looked it up and I was like, oh, yeah. He really is hiding behind all of that bushery, shrubbery.
Yeah.
Do either of you, I'm not a big history guy.
I'm not either.
So I don't know the accurate, everyone's shaking their head. So any historians out there listening, if we're getting some of the facts wrong, blame the movies. Because we're basing it on the movies.
If we had my mom on the podcast, she'd set us straight. I remember the first time I saw this movie, it was kind of like, it struck me as like the MCU for people who are really like Anglophiles, because every time a character is introduced as like a Darnsley or a Dudley or whatever, my mom would like gasp and be like, oh my God. Amazing. So it was like, Ant-Man just walked on the screen. So I might have to consult her after this, see if we're butchering history.
Well, we're talking about the movies, but I didn't know if honestly, I just didn't know if either of you were, because Lauren, I know you're a big Shakespeare fan. Not that that's in any way the same thing, but
I mean, like.
Yeah. No, I just was asking because I wasn't sure.
No, I get it though, because like I do know certain things, and like I did look up Mary Queen of Scots after this, especially because like in relation to The Favorite, I was like, is this set before? Is this set after? Like,
it's like 300 years before.
It's 300 years before.
Which is insane.
Yeah.
Especially since we like paired them and it's like, oh, it's these like period dramas. They're 300 years apart.
They're 300 years apart. Yeah. That was so interesting to me. And I also wanted to know when Mary says to Elizabeth, I think you're going to kill me just like Henry did to your mother. I was like, who was her mother? Because of course she was talking about Henry VIII. Her mother was Anne Boleyn.
Yeah,
and I was like, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Right. I found it helpful. I found myself kind of lost a little bit about halfway through the movie, kind of not really sure, like, different plot threads. And I ended up pausing it and reading about them on Wikipedia.
Oh, that's
and then But then when I came back to the movie, I was like, okay, now I know exactly what's going on. And I knew who everybody was, and I understood it a lot better. And that was one of the things about the movie that I don't want to say it's necessarily a fault, but it's very much made for people who already know this story.
Agreed. It's not like a 101. It's like, especially because there are just a lot of like white dudes with beards. And it's just kind of like, okay, yeah, who's, I know I got her brother and like the third husband mixed up. I was like, wait, she has to marry her brother? And I was like, okay, no, that's not her brother. Like, her half brother, which, but yeah, I will say that I don't want to pat them on the head too much, but I did find it interesting how there are actors of color in this movie who have lines and like names, and there are also background players of color, which, and you know, again, like, I don't want to pat them on the head too much because of course there is always still work to be done in terms of visibility and representation, but like when Gemma Chan popped up as Elizabeth's lady in waiting, like I was like, oh wow, Gemma Chan. And with the ambassador between England and Scotland is played by a Black actor, which I thought was interesting because he had a pretty significant role. And then of course her secretary, her, you know, gay best friend who may have also been gender fluid, was played by a Latinx actor. Yeah, I thought, and it is funny, Brian, I'm with you. I don't read a lot of user reviews because but the first one that pops up on IMDb is somebody bitching about all of that casting. And it's like, oh yeah, fuck you. This is why I don't read these.
Yeah.
I will say, yeah, like this one, again, I don't want to pat them on the head too much, but like they tried. It was a big, like, you tried sticker. One other, I think it's notable that Mary Queen of Scots was directed by a woman, because we still don't see a lot of that. And that I was reading on IMDb, which is what I immediately do after I watch any movie, that she had to fight to keep the scene in where Mary has her period. Which is a scene I really liked, and I feel like you are seeing, like, especially in the past 10 years, like, we're seeing more in historical, like, period pieces that, like, oh yeah, people had bodily functions, you know, have always had bodily functions, but like, this is how they handled it then, you know, when tampons were not a thing the way they are now. And I thought that was really interesting. And I'm like, that is a sign of like a female filmmaker, that she was like, no, like, we're going to show that she has her period. And, you know, there is blood when there is a period. And I don't know, it was a little thing I appreciated. And I was like, thank you for fighting to keep that in. Yeah.
And it's so, I mean, it's truly plot wise, it's never mentioned again. It's completely insignificant.
Oh, right.
But it also makes sense why they'd want to cut it, because you don't lose anything by cutting it, but you don't lose anything by keeping it either.
Right.
Does that make sense?
So I wouldn't say it's totally insignificant. I mean, it's a distant relationship, but it is sort of a precursor to the plot line about her eventual heir, right? And we do have that sort of parallel with Elizabeth when it's not that she's fertile, but she doesn't want to couple up, or not fertile. Sorry, it's not that she's infertile, but she doesn't want to. She doesn't trust anybody.
Right.
She doesn't trust anybody to bear
hair. She has to be a man.
And I think.
Well, I really liked that parallel between those two characters.
Same.
And how they kind of it almost makes sense. Like, you could almost see that Queen Elizabeth, that Mary is reacting to everything that Elizabeth has done.
Very much so, yeah.
And at the same time, Mary's what the trouble that she gets into and everything that happens is a direct result of marrying a man.
Yeah.
And so it's like Elizabeth was right, and she shouldn't have done any of that stuff because she ended up getting executed. And I think that's also the I think that's where the feminist sort of slant comes in that it's about these two women who kind of are at odds with each other, and that plays into history. Like their rivalry and relationship plays into what actually happened.
Yeah, and I mean the whole like kind of anachronistic contemporary take, like I thought did do a decent job too of like these problems have not gone away. I mean, you know, as women, and I mean I say this as a white woman who can get away with a hell of a lot more than women of color, but we still have these decisions to make, and you know there can be regrets either way, and you know we can get screwed either way, and we often do. And I thought the movie was like fairly successful at conveying that. I mean that's what I got out of it. But yeah, I thought it was interesting how like they showed how the choices Mary made that, you know, were kind of to make her more free, like ended up kind of trapping her, or like, you know, she would act on her decision to marry a man who then ends up being this total drunken loser. Yeah.
What I like about that though is that it's not like a tragic decision, because there's no hubris to it. She's confident about, you know, all of the decisions she makes. Even as she walks up to the execution, you know, she bears that huge red dress and she's like, whatever, you know, I've set up my heir. King, what is his name?
King
Henry? James. Okay, I was like, it's one of those. He's going to be set up, hopefully. And so she, you know, no matter what, like it's especially after that scene, right, where Rizzio and her newlywed husband wake up in bed the next morning, and she's like pissed off, but she's like, we're moving on, you know, we're whatever, we're trucking.
What I did like about that, and I mean, like, you know, yeah, revisionist, whatever, but I did appreciate how it was like, Rizzio, I'm not mad at you. Like, I know, you know, you are who you are, and that is a thing that happened. But here's the thing, you can't do my husband. Like, and not because it's like, you know, sanctity of marriage, but it was just like, you realize like now he knows. So that has put you in danger. But like, you know, I'm more pissed at him than I am at you. But yeah, like she
phrased it. Sorry, I was just gonna say she phrased it as like, you know, it's not your fault, you fall into his charms, we've both made that mistake. So it's more of like, well, yeah, he's a bastard, so, you know.
Yeah. He did give her a very nice orgasm via oral, which I also appreciated that part. It was like, honey, I've been there. I have succumbed to the charms of a man who's good at oral, who turned out to be one. It was relatable content.
Absolutely. Well, while we're on those characters, Matt, you had said something, you were excited to get into its treatment of the homosexual characters or bisexual or sexually fluid characters. It definitely does feel like they are there to be punished and to be the thing, and to be the sort of a plot device, basically, that he betrays her, and that sets everything up.
I mean, Rizzio at the end is literally reduced to a prop. You know, when he's dying and Mary is like bearing him on her back, it's like an all too literal metaphor for what they're trying to use his character for. You know, he's this tragic burden whose death is, you know, it's tragic in its own right, but I feel like the movie is using it more for character development for Mary. It makes her harder, you know, and it also sets up that she really can't trust her husband. And it's interesting that they have, you know, it's not that they have Rizzio as the token gay character, because they have her husband also, who I'm wishing I could remember his name. I think he's Darnsley. He's the Earl of Darnsley or something.
I think so, yeah.
Something or other. Because they have both of them, right? And they kind of play two sides of a coin. There's very obviously like good gay, bad gay.
Yeah.
But they're, in the end, they're kind of both used to the same functions, or at least they allow the film to use gay characters in like the whole spectrum of ways that films have historically used gay characters as props. You know, you have comedy, you have tragedy, you have like, this, you know, this character that we presumed is straight is actually gay, you know, like that sort of teasing. And you have, you know, ribaldry, you have like, they run the whole gamut. And it's not, it's you know, I feel like giving the movie crumbs, it's not as bad a representation as it could have been. I think Rizzio, Rizzio has more pathos to him than I was really expecting, and his death scene is really sad, but the way that it sort of all revolves around Mary just made me not uncomfortable, but it was sort of like, really. And even the forgiveness moment, you know, where she reconciles with him after his big betrayal, after he slept with her husband, was so like, you know, she paraphrased Born This Way. You know, she grabbed his face and she was like, it is only in your nature. You can't help it. And it was like, this is so, you know, I hate the term virtue signaling, but it was very that. Yeah.
I was more okay with the, hey, I've been there too, like we both succumbed to him. But yeah, like the you are who you are was yeah, it was. I would be curious to know, because I think I may have read on IMDb, so take that for what it's worth, that there is speculation that her husband was bisexual. I would be curious to know, Rizzio, like what is known about him. I have no idea.
Yeah, I was going to ask that, like, because I know we've established none of us know anything about history, but I was going to ask if anybody knew if that was based on a real person, or if it really was just this fictionalized, made up prop to kind of show this side of her.
He was a real person. I do know that much. And he was like her personal secretary. Mm-hmm. I do not know his orientation, like his, you know, possible gender fluidity that we see. Like, I am not sure about that. And I would be curious to know.
Yeah.
If it is a historically preserved fact that her husband was bisexual, I'm sure there is a counterpart to that story, that, you know, there was somebody in her court, or, you know, close to her, that was, let's just say, helping him enable his bisexuality to the point that it was known.
Yeah. Open.
So I am not sure about the literal accuracy of Rizzio's character, but I'm sure there was a version of Rizzio in history.
Right.
So, like I said, we have discussed that none of us really know much about history, and that the movie treats the story like it's common knowledge. So it might well just be that we're three Americans, that maybe we didn't grow up with this story. Yeah. I don't get a lot of listens overseas, so I'm not that stressed about it. But I wanted to acknowledge that, because like I don't know if our lack of knowing about it is just because like I said, I don't know if that's a story that they grew up with the way that we grew up with, you know, George Washington or whatever it was.
Right.
One of the other things, though, but I wanted to bring up was that, and I think this does kind of play into how it's, like I'd said, that it feels like it's made for people who know the story. The whole thing with Elizabeth getting smallpox, because there was that letter that was like, there was that information where she's like, she's not well. And then that was actually the moment that prompted me to like pause it and do some research, because I was like, I don't know what's going on. And it turns out the movie takes place over 15 years.
Right.
They don't age at all. And there's no real sense of time passing. And so suddenly she has smallpox, and then she doesn't, and she's got the scars. All of that stuff really happened really quickly.
Yeah, I didn't even realize that the scope was that large.
I did, because like, only because you see her son as a teenager at the end. I also did notice how they circumvented like not aging Saoirse, because Elizabeth says like, I picture you as you were when I met you, which was when she was significantly younger. So yeah, I was like, oh, very clever movie. But I was like, no, I get it though. Like, because sometimes old age makeup just looks terrible. So, but yeah, the smallpox thing was interesting. It was like, oh wow, I didn't realize that was a thing that happened to Elizabeth. And just, it is interesting how, like, we think of, we often see Queen Elizabeth depicted in movies as like with the makeup and blah, blah, blah. And like Margot Robbie does not have it on for most of the movie. And she's got this very like bumpy, scarred face. And, she even like takes off her hairpiece at one point. And I found that very interesting how like we're seeing this. And I have not, if I've seen Elizabeth with Kate Blanchett, it has been years and years and years. So it's just like, maybe that shows more of it. But I was just like, this is a very interesting, like stripped down, unglamorous side of her.
Before we move on, I did want to, we've kind of briefly touched on Margot Robbie and Saoirse Ronan and the performances, but I really think that the two of them elevate this movie to what it is.
So much.
We've talked about how it's so close to being a good movie. If either of these performances didn't work, it would be a bad movie.
Exactly.
Totally.
I thought their scene together was really beautiful. Like,
Oh, that is so phenomenal.
Oh, well done. I mean, and you can just tell, like, they are both, I'm an actor myself, not a great one, but like, I feel like you can tell when just actors are in the moment and they are so completely in it. And like, at one point Saoirse's nose is running and like, it just feels so human and so intimate. And I love that scene, and they're both fantastic in it.
I think I read, this could very easily be myth because it sounds like the sort of fact that you would hear about like every movie, but I think I read that was like the first scene, like they kept them apart, they shot separately so that was like their big, meeting scene in real life also.
I think I'd read that too, but it was, they shot them separately because of the schedules, and Margot Robbie's last day was Saoirse Ronan's first day. And so they shot it first because they had them together. And then, I may have mixed it up. I don't know whose first day it was and the last day it was, but they did it that way because of scheduling and whatever. Right. But yeah, like the scene, it feels like they had that scene. They were like, this would be so good. And then they just built a movie backwards from it.
Yeah.
I could see that. Yeah.
I want to see
that scene
a version of this
great.
Movie. Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to see a version of this movie where instead of having the parallel structure where we keep cutting between Margot Robbie and Saoirse Ronan, instead they just do that thing that they do in the Star Wars sequels between Kylo Ren and where they're just like psychically present in each other's room.
Oh my God.
Anything to lead to more scenes of these two actresses together, I would be fine with.
I would say that, like, Margot Robbie, it's just, since I think the first time I saw her was Wolf of Wall Street, and it was like, I was so impressed with what she did with that character who could have been like standard babe, even the way she was written, but like, it was like, oh, who is this? Like, and I feel like she's kind of on the Charlize Theron route where it's like, I could have been like standard babe and like done fine, but like, no, I'm going to be Tanya Harding. I'm going to be Queen Elizabeth. And I mean, it's the same thing with Charlize. I don't like to pat actors on the head for being quote unquote ugly, because it's like, no, you are never ugly. But like, but also it's just, no, it's like, no, I'm going to dive in and be like, I'm going to be gritty and real. And yeah, I really loved her Elizabeth. And as much as I like Margot Robbie, I wasn't sure if I would. And yeah, she did great.
Yeah, she's very good in this movie.
I found her arc so much more sympathetic the second time around. Not that I didn't find it sympathetic the first time, but I was just heartbroken by her whole, like, I think one of the best scenes of the movie, obviously coming nowhere near that ending scene, but where she's talking to her advisor in the stable like right after the horse has given birth, and she's just kind of lingering, and she's enjoying the moment, and she's kind of like, she has kind of like this dreamy half there expression on her face. I thought that was amazing. And I felt so bad for her.
That was another scene where I was like, that could have been hacky with like a worse director and a worse actor. But yeah, like, and just with the horse, I'm like, I could have been beaten over the head by this symbol, and I'm not. This is just beautiful. Like, this tells me so much about Elizabeth and what she is feeling, and just her inner self. Yeah.
How would you, here's my question. How would you fix this movie to make it a great movie, to elevate it, just like bump it up?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know. I'm not a filmmaker, so I think a lot of it for me was not an unfamiliarity with the story, and kind of the way it hopped back and forth, and it didn't give you that indication that time was passing. So maybe something to clear that up would help a lot, but I don't know if that would necessarily solve it either.
I would maybe go further with the like feminist update and anachronistic choices. Yeah, I would go further with it, because I felt, I felt like it was a "you tried" sticker, and it's just, I don't think the problem lies, as we've established, I don't think the problem lies with the actresses at all, because I thought they were amazing. But yeah, I would go further. I would go deeper. I would be bolder. Maybe not every choice would work, but I think it would be more effective as a whole and more memorable.
Yeah. Well, that's a great place to leave off. Why don't we take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll talk about the Academy Award-winning The Favorite by Yorgos Lanthimos. I'm certain I said his name wrong. We'll see you in a second.
Dearest Queen, you are mad. Giving me a palace. It is a monstrous extravagance. Mrs. Morley, we are at war.
We won.
Oh, it is not over. We must continue.
Oh, I did not know that.
The Queen is an extraordinary person.
They were all staring, weren't they? I can tell even if I can't see, and I heard the word fat, and ugly.
No one but me would dare, and I did not. She's been stalked by tragedy.
Everyone leaves me. Dies.
I apologize for my appearance. I hoped I might be employed here by you. As something.
A monster for the children to play with, perhaps.
It is important to make new friends in court, is it not?
You're so beautiful.
Stop it, you mock me.
If I were a man, I would ravish you.
You have become close to Abigail.
She is a viper. You're jealous.
You must send Abigail away.
I do not want to.
Let's shoot something. Sometimes it is hard to remember whether you have loaded the pellet or not.
I must take control of my circumstance.
I'm on my side.
Always.
Favor is a breeze that shifts direction all the time. Then, in an instant, you're back sleeping with a bunch of scabrous whores.
As it turns out, I'm capable of much unpleasantness.
Did you just look at me? Look at me! How dare you! Close your eyes!
I could not just stand by and let you destroy me. You are enjoying all of this, aren't you?
Oh, it is fun to be queen sometimes.
If you do not go, I will start kicking you. And I will not stop.
My dear friend, how good to see you've returned from hell.
I'm sure you shall pass through it one day.
Welcome back. Now we're on to 2018's The Favorite, starring Academy Award winner Olivia Colman and Academy Award winner Rachel Weisz and Academy Award winner Emma Stone. But only one of them won the Oscar for this movie.
And that is Olivia Colman, who I previously knew from a British sitcom called Peep Show. Our friend Kyle, back when we were roommates, he introduced me to this wonderful British sitcom called Peep Show that is on Hulu. And Olivia Colman was on it, I think, almost every season. She was a love interest of one of the characters who eventually, like, mothered his child. And so when ads for The Favorite started popping up, I was like, is that Sophie?
She is great in this movie. I know her not just from this movie, but around the same time this came out, I watched the first season of Fleabag.
Oh, right.
So
She is on that.
I knew her from those two.
But yeah, Peep Show, highly recommend it. She's very funny on it too, even though she's kind of more of the straight man character. But yeah, I loved her in this movie. I follow this gay Instagrammer, Dublin Zoetrope, who is very funny, but he has this constant like hate campaign against Olivia Colman winning the Oscar because he thought Glenn Close should have won the Oscar. Agree to disagree, man. She's real good in this.
I don't know how you can. I love Glenn Close, and I thought for sure Glenn Close was going to get it in the walk.
I did too.
Olivia Colman is the superior performance between those two, and it's a superior movie. That movie was not good.
That's what I heard. Yeah. I think Glenn's Oscar win will come at some point, but yeah, I felt like that was an award-worthy performance from Olivia Colman. Like,
yeah, absolutely.
Character. I mean, and all three of them are just, I mean, they're characters. I mean, this is, I feel like where Mary Queen of Scots, I talked about, I wish had made more bold choices. The Favorite makes bold choices, and they are very, very bold. And I think that's what has made it so memorable to me.
Mm-hmm.
Rachel Weisz's character is so good, like addictive. Like I cannot get enough of her. The scene where she fires the blank at Emma Stone's character, oh my God. I can't even put it into words. I loved that scene, and I loved her in this movie in general.
She's fantastic in this. She is always someone I kind of forget about. And then I see her in a movie and I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. She's really, really good. And that's why she's had this very long career, especially for an actress in a lot of mainstream films. You know, shelf lives of Hollywood actresses, even when they're British, are not real long. And she's kind of defied the odds. And this, should we do a plot summary before we get too far?
Go for it.
All right. So again, this is one that plays a lot with history. So I am not sure what's accurate and what's not, apart from what's on IMDb. We are now in the 18th century. And Queen Anne is the ruler. She is a widow who has lost 17 children. She now has 17 pet bunnies. She's quite quirky. And her chief advisor is Lady Sarah Churchill, and that is Rachel Weisz's character. And they are also lovers. They have a very close relationship in a lot of ways. And Lady Sarah, like, is basically like the bitch in charge. She kind of rules England. Well, one day her cousin Abigail shows up, and that is Abigail is played by Emma Stone. And Abigail is very educated, was once from a very wealthy family, but her father was a drunk and a gambling addict. She's fallen on hard times, so Lady Sarah gives her a job as a scullery maid. But Abigail is very ambitious and soon finds herself in the crosshairs of Queen Anne, and it basically becomes this whole triangle of like power and sex, and like honestly it's mostly the kind of drama you see reserved for men, except here it's dark comedy and it's ladies.
Queen Anne actually had 17 miscarriages, not babies. The movie, the reason I clarify that is because the movie talks about them like they're babies, and if you didn't know, I happened upon it when I was looking it up. I was like, oh, they were miscarriages, because in the movie she refers to them as babies.
I think she says
died though.
I think she says in the movie that, I mean, I thought that was the implication anyway. But I think she says something in the explanation, you know, when Emma Stone is getting that information out of her, that she kind of keeps the rabbits as substitute, right? Like that she lost all of these children.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, where like some of them were miscarriages, some of them were, it sounds like some were stillborn.
Okay.
I do think she had some live babies who just died very young.
She said they were born as blood, right?
They were born as blood, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
And
Okay.
I do know one anachronistic thing, at least if IMDb is to be believed. So during the time this movie takes place, the real Queen Anne had a husband for part of it, but I think this movie takes place over like 4 years, but he died like halfway through. So like, you know, but I can see why they kind of wrote him out.
Player.
Inconsequential. Yeah.
Yeah.
She also has gout, and we're kind of led to believe she probably has depression.
Yeah.
Which of course was not really called that then. She's real queer too, which is great.
Yeah. And the relationship that she has with Rachel Weisz is one of just, it's so interesting. Because at first, on the surface, it seems like a relationship that's purely born out of Rachel Weisz's need to basically possess the throne and to possess the power that comes with it. But as Emma Stone's character, as Abigail, attempts to do basically the same thing, you know, these two characters are thrown into contrast, and you start seeing the ways that Sarah Churchill, that Sarah, her affection for Queen Anne is pretty authentic.
Yeah.
You know, she has like this really difficult love-hate relationship with her, or like kind of a brutally honest love,
right?
Like a dominatrix love that she has with Queen Anne. But I thought that was really interesting. I was rewatching it with my roommate, and we, you know, like an hour into the movie, we were like, wait, so do we think, like, whose affections do we think are real? And we had to like think through it again.
It is like they have a whole history. Like they have known each other, I think, since they were kids, and they have like nicknames for each other and inside jokes. And yeah, it is about halfway through where you're like, wait, like these are, you know, this is a very complex relationship, but it's also a very real one. Like, and I feel like even in 2020, we don't see a lot of complex female relationships. And that's one of the things I love most about this movie is just, it's so rich and just, yeah, it's my favorite thing about this movie, hands down.
I think one thing that I also really appreciated was it would have been so easy for this movie to have taken on the whole, you know, like gay for pay mentality, right? And that's not really the case with either of the characters. With Sarah, because there's like a genuine affection there in the history, like you said, Lauren. And with Emma Stone, that's just sort of her outlook to everything and everybody. You know, her nuptials. With her hastily married husband, where she's like scheming while viciously jacking him off.
That scene is amazing.
It was like, so good.
I remember watching this. I saw it in the theater, I think like very early 2019, and I still remember that scene, and I was like, what the I'm like, oh my God, like this is brilliant. I mean, yeah. Also, what's very funny is that the guy who plays Abigail's husband is also Elizabeth's lover in Mary Queen of Scots. I had to look up this one of Abigail, Emma Stone's lines in particular, because I wanted to talk about it. Because at one point, I think it's what's his face's character, Lord Harley, who says to her, like, whose side are you on? And she's like, I am on my side always. And I was like, I love it. I love it so much. Again, you don't hear female characters say that very much. And it's like, again, in a kind of like you were saying, Matthew, in a lesser movie, like that could have been part of a very shallow, like self-serving character, but we also get insight, like she's had a rough go of it. And she is kind of taking the opportunities she has and like running with them. And, you know, I do like how like she's, you know, she's very conniving, but throughout the movie, like the movie is not unsympathetic to her either. It's like, you get it. Like, yeah, you know, you get why she's jacking off a guy while scheming, which, you know, maybe many
who hasn't done
there.
that?
maybe not saying it out loud, but sometimes in our heads, like we're doing
Scheming.
one another and scheming.
Another thing that I really liked about this movie is that it doesn't go whole hog with like the whole period line delivery. You know, it's got a really funny balance of eloquent and witty and biting, you know, lines that are vicious but like really eloquent threats, and then a character will just go cunt. You know?
I loved the use of the word cut in this.
Oh my god.
It was always just so brilliantly delivered, because at one point she calls her father a cunt, and I know, like, I think Rachel Weisz uses it several times. It's just like, oh, this is so good. Yeah, and I think something like that is a hard balance to attain between, like, how would they have spoken, but also let's insert a little bit of modernness, whatever, into it too. And I think, like, the dialogue is really clever that way.
Yeah.
And it's just, they do a lot of anachronisms in this, especially like with the costume design, which I noticed in the theater, because I was like, her dress when she's a scullery maid, I'm like, that's denim. I'm like, and that was not a fabric in the 18th century. And then I read that the costume designer like deliberately used like their like 3D print lace and vinyl and like denim, and that was all on purpose. And I'm like, that is so cool and
wow,
so well thought out. I think it also may have arisen from budgetary concerns too, because this film did not have a huge budget. So like they would have to repurpose costumes after they shot, which I think is also super interesting. And like they had to custom design wigs, not only because of budget, but because there are not a lot of period pieces that take place during this time. So they couldn't go to warehouses and get 18th century stuff because there's not a lot of it, which I also thought was pretty fascinating.
Reading online that Nicholas Hoult had named his wigs.
Yes! He had the best wigs. Nicholas Hoult just appears to be having a blast the entire time. Because he's in the context of the movie, he's like representing the opposition because they are at war, and he's always trying to get the queen to do stuff she doesn't necessarily want to do. And also Emma Stone's character for a while is kind of working as a double agent, where she's kind of spying on the decisions that Queen Anne and Sarah are making and like kind of reporting back to him in secret. And he's just this like smarmy little asshole with these huge high wigs, and he's got like beauty marks, which I was reading that like they would place them different parts of his face, he and the makeup designer, like he's having a ball. Like he was one where I remember seeing him in About a Boy. I don't always like child actors because they're often just very like presentational and very precious. Yeah. And I remember I was like, that kid is really good. Like he's got something. And it's just, I still just really enjoy him every time he pops up on my screen.
I remember him from About a Boy, and then I remember him in A Single Man.
Oh my God, was he the love interest in A Single Man?
No, that's Matthew. Oh. The one that dies is Matthew Good. But he like
no, not the dead love interest, but the one who
he's like
reawakens
the young
passion.
Yeah. But it was weird because I remember seeing him in that and being really attracted to him, and then I was like, he's the kid from About a Boy. It's too weird. Like I have since gotten over that, and now he's an adult, but it was just a strange.
I get that though. It's a weird moment. He's so good in this. Really just everyone is amazing in this.
Yeah. I want to take a moment to talk about Emma Stone because only because I'm not generally speaking a fan of hers. I like Easy A and I like this. I think her win for La La Land, like to me that's insane. Like
wasn't one I agree with either.
So I've always kind of thought of her as like overrated, honestly, because since the Oscar, and I'm just kind of, but she's great in this. I completely buy her accent.
Yeah, it was good.
I thought she did a really good job with it.
I'm not a hardcore fan. I enjoyed La La Land just fine. Didn't agree with her win for it. But yeah, it seems like when she's good, she's really, really good. And this role was such a good fit for her, I thought.
Oh,
because, like she got to really like show off her acting chops and be like conniving and a little bitchy, but also like with a little bit of goofiness that like you understood why the queen took to her. Like she had that genuine charm that you can't fake. And yeah, I also have to say I really loved seeing her blonde hair because she is a natural blonde. Yay, blondes represent. But I also love that like she's not wearing a lot of makeup and she has freckles, and it's just, I don't know. I find it that maybe might say something gay, but like it's just her freckles are so cute. Like
yeah, I definitely agree with her that she really capitalizes off of that goofiness, and that's I mean, as long as we're doing a roundtable on our general thoughts on Emma Stone, I always like her when she pops up, but I agree. I think she can be very hammy, which is kind of a character that she revisits a lot of the time. You know, she's one of those actors who, without playing the same character over and over again, you see her and you're like, oh, that's Emma Stone. She's going to be doing Emma Stone.
Yeah.
And she did do Emma Stone in this movie, but a variation of Emma Stone that like worked so well. And so I was a little skeptical when I first saw that she was, when I saw the promotional materials and everything, but she put all of that to shame. Like she completely owned that character. I loved her in this movie.
Yeah. Because I think with some like writers, actors, viewers, whatever, like someone who can like kind of worm their way to the top, which is what her character does. Like you think of them as very conniving and manipulative because they are, but you have to remember like how they get there is like they have a lot of personality and like they're able to endear themselves, and like it's what's dangerous about sociopaths is like a lot of times like it's very easy to fall under their spell. And yeah, like she has that charisma, and I thought it was a good match. And I thought it was a smart career decision on her part. It's like because she's not maybe the first person you think of when you think of like period dark comedy, and it's like, oh, but she's great. Like yeah, she's very much that sort of modern Emma Stone character, but in the 18th century. She also has this quality, this like tremble to her that, even when she's being manipulative and controlling, she has this element of insecurity that you can always tell Sarah can get the one up on her. Like one of my favorite scenes is when Sarah comes back right from her her trip to the whorehouse, and she like just walks in the room in the middle of the recital, starts like picking up a cup of tea or something, and Emma stands up and is trying to take control of the situation. She's like, I'm a lady now, I got married, I have more authority. And Richard Weisz is like, everybody leave, and everybody just leaves. And you can see it in Emma Stone's face. She's still standing upright, she's still controlling the situation, but she's like, oh fuck, like this doesn't this doesn't hold as much sway as I thought it would. And so there was, I think, just in the aspect of, right, you have these two characters in sharp contrast, and Emma Stone really does, she has all of these qualities of her character that are her own, but she's clearly her character is like trying to ingratiate herself into this specific mold. She sees what Sarah Churchill's doing. She's like, oh, I can do that. And she can. But then you also see the ways in which they're completely different in that sense.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I think that does lead back to what we were talking about earlier about the relationship between Queen Anne and Lady Sarah, which like, yeah, at first you're kind of like, is this just a power thing? And then it's like, no, like this is a unique relationship, and someone can't just worm in and take her place. Like she is irreplaceable. Sarah is in a lot of ways. Also, fun fact I learned from IMDb, Sarah Churchill is Winston Churchill's ancestor. She is also the ancestor through the Spencer family of Princess Diana, and therefore William and Harry. So in some ways, Sarah like had the last laugh because she had this like really interesting legacy. I will also say a Sarah moment I really loved is just toward the end when like she is going to be exiled from England. She says to her husband just as the carriage is pulling up, she's like, yeah, I think I'm tired of England. Like, I think we need to leave. And it's just like, I love that character moment because it's like, yeah, that's exactly what you would say. It's like, no, it has to be my idea, like up until the very end.
Yeah. Rachel, the performances across the board are just fantastic. Absolutely. Are either of you, I'm going to say his name wrong again, but are you either of you fans of Yorgos Lanthimos? Have you seen his other films?
I have not. This was my first. How about you?
I rented The Killing of a Sacred Deer for 99 cents on iTunes on the basis solely of the filmmaker, knowing nothing about it. And when I decided to watch, what I did was I actually like rented it. I don't know if you've ever rented anything on iTunes, but you can like rent and watch later. So I kind of like sat on it for a few weeks. And then one day I was like, oh, I should just watch this movie. It's about to expire. I didn't watch a trailer. I didn't know anything about it other than the filmmaker. And it's probably one of the few movie watching experiences that I can say, honestly, fucked me up. Like, it fucked me up for like a couple of days. I was like, I could not get this movie out of my mind for several days. I encourage you both to watch it because I want to talk about it. But I also don't want to say anything about it.
Okay, it's one of those. Okay.
Yeah, Nicole Kidman, Colin Farrell, and this weird-looking kid that was in Dunkirk who I will never trust ever again. Like, I found he was cast as this comic book character, Y: The Last Man, and I like read about it. I was like reading about it, and I was like, I can't watch that show if he's in it. Like, this movie scarred me, and he scarred me. It's fucked up. And so I saw that. I haven't seen The Lobster, but on the basis of that, I did the same thing right at the beginning of quarantine. Shudder had a free 30 days, so I watched. Oh, yeah. They had Dogtooth, which was his first movie. But I did the same where I was like, I'm not going to watch anything. I'm just going to come into this movie and watch it. It didn't fuck me up as much. It's definitely fucked up. This, The Favorite. Have you seen The Lobster, Matthew? Have you seen any of this?
Yeah, I've seen The Lobster and Killing of a Sacred Deer. I haven't seen Dogtooth.
Okay, well, I will text you about Killing of a Sacred Deer.
Okay.
But so what I was just going to say, though, The Favorite seems like his most mainstream, like straight. It's not that straightforward, but comparatively, it's a straightforward sort of comedy.
Yeah. I feel like all of his films have this sort of undercurrent of darkness or of at least an awkwardness. And I mean, that's something that it really comes to the fore with Killing of a Sacred Deer. Just the sense that something is like off, like a tonal, weirdness is too vague of a word, but it's like it's uncanny. Like you're watching it and you're like, there's something like a little disconcerting about this. And in The Favorite, that was, it was buried under a lot of comedy, but I think the switches up between the extremely formal dialogue and the more colloquial stuff. The ball scene or the dance scene where he's doing like again, we've established none of us are historical experts, but I can't imagine.
Like the B-boy thing. Yeah. I love a good anachronistic dance scene. Can I just say, A Knight's Tale with Golden Years. I loved that sequence, and I love like there's that sequence in The Favorite, and then there's where Abigail and Queen Anne are like dancing around with Queen Anne's crutches, and they're like doing some like modern moves, and I love that because it's like everything is slightly askew. I noticed that as well, like the scene with like the naked dude and like all the dudes are like throwing stuff at him, and I also just loved that as a contrast between like these women engaged in these like complex relationships and these real power and sex dynamics, and the men are just like turds. I mean, they're just so base, and I really just loved that contrast because it's often reversed in movies. I even read on IMDb that this movie just barely passes the reverse Bechdel test, where like because there's one scene where two men are talking. It's Nicholas Holt's character and then one other dude, and they're talking about the duck. And that's the only scene where like two men are talking where it doesn't involve the female characters. It's the one scene. So they're like, it barely passes the reverse Bechdel test. And I'm like, God bless it. That's
Good.
wonderful.
I'm just annoyed that I read that too, and I was annoyed that somebody decided to apply a reverse Bechdel test.
You know they would.
Oh, I think it's funny.
Like, of course, like, oh, I'm gonna watch this movie about women just so I can note how much it doesn't talk about men. Like, fuck off with that. Go away.
I mean, you wonder why, like, I hesitate to talk about film with men. Like, yeah, it was a real Matthew, it was a real conversation I had with Brian before. Yes, about this podcast. It was like, it's because it just like, yeah, that is, you know, yeah, I'm not surprised at all. Somebody watched the movie so they could do that.
Yeah.
Well, I'm very glad that the exception was talking about the duck because I loved that duck.
I loved the duck. It was,
Oh
again, like, it was just a little weird touch that just kind of, like, made you go, what am I watching? And it was fantastic. Like, it is one of the bold choices that really does, like, set this movie apart. It's weird and it's dark. And, like, dark comedy is so hard to do well. I was very happy when I heard this was going to be one of the movies.
And it's queer.
It's so weird. And I did not expect that when I first saw like promos and stuff.
I love that there's like a moment where it becomes explicit, not in the sense of like visually explicit, but like if you didn't know what you were in for, you do now. And that's where Emma Stone is like in the library, she's getting the book, and you just like watch her watching it, and you know, Queen Anne and Sarah going at it, and I think it mostly just holds on her face as it clicks for her, and she's like,
yes,
oh, okay.
I also like, yeah, right before that, like Queen Anne says, I want you to fuck me, and it's like, okay, like, it's just, you know, again, even now, like, award-winning movie, you know, not necessarily like mainstream, but kind of, because it's got two very mainstream female actresses in it, and it's queer, and like not tragic queer. I mean, tragic in some ways, but like women having sex, like that should not have blown my mind in early 2019, and yet it did.
Yeah, and the queerness and the sexuality isn't the reason for the tragedy. It's sort of a tragic story, but not because of the gay thing. The gay thing is just there.
I was just gonna say it's like a dangerous liaison story, right? Like the fact of, you know, the conniving and the competition doesn't really have anything to do with queerness. There's an element of that that's inherently baked in because of the secrecy aspect, but that's not anything that's really, you know, they don't drag on that. Like it's not defining for anybody. Yeah.
I will say, though, at the same time, queer women love to talk about how messy we are. And I love how messy they all are. Because, again, that is not something you see in films that aren't, like, explicitly LGBTQ niche. Mm-hmm. And it was so great. I'm like, we're complex, we're messy as fuck, all three of us. And, like, we're engaged in this like love sexuality triangle, and it just was so gratifying.
I love the scenes where the conflict really comes to the fore, and you can see that Queen Anne is kind of playing with both of them.
Yes.
Like in the well, first of all, there's the scene right where she like pulls her aside afterwards, and she's like, "You're enjoying this, aren't you?" And she said, "To be beloved, yes, I am." Yeah. And then there's the scene which I thought was just it was relatable in the sense of like, if you're ever trying to vie for like the affections of anybody, whether it's like a friend that you're like, this is my best friend, when they're taking the mud baths, and what's her name? Sarah walks in, she was like, I thought I would get all of the toxins out of my body as well. And, you know, she goes into the inside jokes with Anne. She, you know, they start playing the thing, and Abigail's just sitting there like, huh, yeah, funny.
Yeah. I loved that part because it worked on so many levels, because it's also when you do start to catch on that like, oh, they have like they have real feeling. Like there's real affection here because like if you're just doing a power play with someone, you don't have like cute little inside jokes where you're making a mud mustache and giggling. But yeah, it also shows it's like, oh, three's a crowd. Like I thought Queen Anne was so interesting because first of all, like when she was really enjoying it, I was like, oh, that's also relatable. It's like we all like attention, but also I thought it also showed like as a queen, like she is used to like getting what she wants when she wants it. Whereas these other two like have had to like claw their way up like fairly frequently, even though like Lady Sarah like is of nobility and you know hasn't fallen from grace the way Abigail has, but like yeah, Queen Anne, like she's the queen. Loved that dynamic.
Yeah, just the three of them, it really is fantastic. But watching it again now after Olivia Colman won Best Lead Actress, I know there's always that sort of controversy that we've talked about on the podcast, like category fraud, where it's like if like you could have easily have nominated all three of these for Best Supporting Actress, or you could have easily nominated all three of them for Best Lead. But like I would say watching it again, so much of the movie revolves around, they're both so centered on getting her approval.
Right.
I could see that, like I could see why that would be the lead because she's motivating them.
Mm-hmm.
Agreed. And I mean, like, it's not only them trying to get her approval, it's all the dudes.
Oh, yeah.
Who are, like,
everybody.
More. And, you know, everybody wants a piece of Queen Anne. And, like, toward the end when Lady Sarah is kicked out of like, the main palace, and it's like, oh, you know, you have to hand over your key to me. She will not give you an audience. It's like she has so much power where it's like she's not even going to see you. And yeah, and you know, it's taken away just like that, like all of it. And no, I agree. Like when the nominations came out, like I thought that was interesting too, because I was like, so actress, and then it's like, oh, but yeah, that does make sense.
Yeah, I feel like it's very much like you said, everybody in the movie is trying to win her approval, and it's she's very much the center of what's going on. So that makes sense to me.
Even the title, The Favorite, it's like right. Whose favorite? You know,
right.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. So I'm going to throw this question out there for you guys, and you can answer it how you like. What do you think that? And we did kind of talk about it, contrasting them. But what do you think The Favorite gets right that Mary, Queen of Scots got wrong? Where I guess you did kind of talk about that, Lauren, when you were talking about what you would have improved and how you kind of would have doubled down on some of that. I guess you kind of already answered that. I didn't think about it.
I've got more to say, but I'll let Nat go first.
Thank you. Well, that's good because I have very little to say. I think really the big thing for me is that, and I mean this is a basic answer, but in The Favorite, the queer characters were allowed to be, as Lauren said, like messy, right? I feel like there's a certain kind of condescension that you see in quote unquote gay movies or like uplifting movies about gay people, where the gay characters are like angelic, or they're tragically perfect, or you know, Rizzio was like, he didn't have a bad bone in his body, and even you know his betrayal of sleeping with Darnsley was chalked up to, oh well, that guy's just bad news. You did nothing wrong. You were just following your nature. And this one, you know, Olivia Colman and Rachel Weisz's character were just horrid to each other, but like in a way that wasn't even necessarily mean. Like there's that scene where they're talking through the wall, where she's like, do you want me to flatter you? You want to just hear like vacuous flatteries? You sometimes look like a badger, and I will tell you when you look horrible, and that's just the truth. And it's like, you don't get that with a character that is written to be as publicly like appealing and you know pandering as possible. So I really liked that about this movie.
Right. Hard agree. I write young adult literature, and there are always conversations in the community and just in the like writer community as a whole about representation and visibility, and like, you know, because for a long time like books were the same as movies, where it was very like kill your gays and like they have to be martyrs. And now there's an upswing of like really positive like representation of gays, which perfect, but also like there's a lot of queers are messy people too, and like my characters are like I write a lot of messy queer characters, and I think we are starting to see that more, which is really awesome. And because it's like you said, like sometimes like having them be too angelic does feel like pandering. And I love the messiness of these characters. I would say for me, what separates this from Mary Queen of Scots is kind of going along with that, just nuance. I mean, no one's all good and no one's all bad here. Like, we see where all three of them are coming from, which I think is one of the film's greatest strengths. It's like, you know, even when they're doing and saying horrible things, like, we often, like, by the end, we kind of get it. It's like, even if I don't agree with you, like, I see why you made the choice you did, even if it was something like very in the heat of the moment, because who of us hasn't done that? I also do think like this movie does a better job of like portraying the absurdity just of like monarchy and having one person in charge of everything, especially when it's someone who maybe doesn't necessarily want that. And yet, because, you know, with Queen Anne, we get that a lot. Like, she, you know, sometimes it's like, yeah, this meeting's done, I'm tired. Like, get out. Yeah. And I think where a lot of the dark comedy comes in is just like, this is just a very weird world. And yet this was supposed to be kind of the normal thing. And I think The Favorite does an amazing job of that.
I think that's a really good point. And it reminds me just all the more of all the ways that Mary Queen of Scots really ignores that, right? And and it's so funny that tension that's put between like Mary being this like queen of tolerance and, you know, like hashtag woke queen, and you know, there's that one scene, right, where she's riding into battle against her brother, and there's the soldier who can only speak Gaelic or something, not Gaelic, but and he's communicating that she's like, are you Catholic? And they're going, no. And she's like, you know what, that's okay, if we die, we're going to the same heaven, she says, as they're riding into battle against the heretic Protestants. And it's like, choose a side, movie, you know, like so I'm glad you brought out the Favorite is actually critical of that kind of structure,
because it's I mean, there's a reason, like, there is still technically monarchy, but they're basically figureheads now, and it's like, The Favorite shows us there's a reason for that, like, and I mean, what Mary Queen of Scots, like, again, this is IMDb, so take it with a grain of salt, but like, Mary's son James was raised as Protestant, actually, and because he did rule over England and Scotland, he's kind of the reason there were a lot of tensions that ended up coming to fruition. I heard like some people even kind of blame him for the Troubles, which was a whole thing. And it's like, dude, I would have liked to have gone more into that and more why like this is just such an effed up system.
Mm-hmm. I'm starting to think we should have invited a British person to come on and chime in on some of this history.
Like, you're wrong about all of this.
Yeah, because I don't know much about it, as we've discussed. But for me, I mean, I agree with everything that you guys said. To answer my own question, I think Mary Queen of Scots is far more the traditional sort of. I'm actually not a huge fan of like costume dramas and things of this sort of genre. And I think that Mary Queen of Scots, while it is beautifully shot and has a couple of great performances, is very much in line with those kinds of costume dramas. It's very much a stereotypical sort of like costume drama, and there's not much to set it apart other than the performances. But even those doesn't really stick with you because the movie is kind of glossing over so much, whereas The Favorite kind of skewers a lot of what the traditional costume dramas even are and how they're shot. and things like that, like the things like the fisheye lens and like the slow motion like duck rays, like things like that. I think it's kind of almost in response to the stuffiness of films like Mary Queen of Scots.
And in its own way, yeah, it's so beautifully shot, but like also kind of winking at the audience, but also not being obnoxious about that, because I hate when filmmakers or stage directors or whomever are like, look at how ironic we're being. It's like, no, stop. But yeah, this just, it's very tongue-in-cheek, the way like tongue-in-cheek is meant to be done.
Yeah, it finds that line somehow.
Yeah.
And it is a lot to do with the performances, like with Olivia Colman and Emma Stone and Rachel Weisz, as we've talked about. Like they really like are this like sort of triptych of these weird, mean, cruel, wonderful characters in a weird, cruel time, you know, and like it's like I said, I'm not really a fan of these sort of these like costume dramas, but this is one that I know I will be revisiting in the years to come, because it's I'm going to want to hang out with these ladies again, and I'm going to want to explore that. And I'm sure when he comes out with another movie, I'll go back and rewatch it or something.
It's sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, it's funny, like you said that Mary Queen of Scots falls so firmly within the genre expectations of like costume drama, and I think to that point, like I don't even see The Favorite as a costume drama, because it doesn't have maybe, I mean, my bias is showing too, in the sense that it's like, yeah, costume dramas in my mind are boring, like they're boring, they're stuffy, and The Favorite, you know, has those fisheye lenses that gives it like a skater video aesthetic at times.
I like
and
that.
it doesn't mesh in my mind with the phrase costume drama. Maybe because it feels more like a comedy than a drama, but it would feel detracting from its dramatic elements to say that it was purely a comedy.
Right.
I don't know.
I am a fan of costume dramas, actually. I love costume dramas. And I mean, like, the aesthetics for me were like a very strong point of Mary Queen of Scots, because like we've all said, like, it's beautiful. And I always enjoy that aspect, even if the drama itself is kind of boring. But yeah, I mean, I lost my train of thought. But yeah, I mean, from someone who enjoys costume dramas, I really liked the way it kind of turned the form on its head, and it had a lot of, it was, for me, it was more dark comedy than drama. And so, yeah, I think that's interesting that like, it's one that like people who aren't into historical pieces and who are like, can all enjoy it.
Yeah, you're right. It's a wonderful movie. Like, honestly, like just revisiting it, I watched it this afternoon as well. And it was a lot of fun. Do either of you have I know, Lauren, you kind of touched on your say something gay. It was Emma Stone. You have a crush on Emma Stone.
It was her beautiful freckles and her blonde hair.
She's very cute. Doesn't really do it for me, but she's cute. Matthew?
Geez. In Mary Queen of Scots, the Lord of Lennox, the guy who is Darnsley's father, I like did a double take. I was like, that he kind of looks like Russell Crowe, actually, weirdly enough.
I could see that.
He's Brendan something or other. Brendan Coyle?
I think so, because he's in a lot of stuff, I feel.
Yeah. He just had a very well sculpted beard in a movie full of people with very well sculpted beards. Or not all of them were very well sculpted. Like you referenced Rasputin with David Tennant, but I guess that was, that was part of his character. But I mean, that's my say something gay about it, I guess.
Right, that's something gay.
I was able to get over being attracted to Nicholas Hoult in The Single Man, so that by the time Mad Max Fury Road came around and this, he's a cutie.
He's very pretty.
Yeah. I don't know that, like, personally I would want to be his friend. I feel like...
I get that.
But I'm not friends with most people I sleep with, so it's fine.
Makes sense.
Well, thank you so much for hopping on Zoom with me, you guys, and talking about these two movies. Do you want to hit us with your social media?
You can go ahead now.
Sure. I'm Jacko on Twitter. That's it.
Nice.
I am on Facebook at Lauren Emily Writes. I am on Twitter at Lauren Emily Rye, W-R-I, ran out of space. And I am on Instagram at Lauren Emily Writes, one word.
And you can find the podcast on Piece of Pie Pod. That's Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. And I myself, I am Brian Rowe. That's Brian with an I, R-O-W-E, on both Twitter and Instagram. Give us a like, give us a follow, write a review on iTunes, because we don't have very many, and I want more, so I'm asking for them. Thanks again, you guys, for hopping on Zoom and recording and talking about these movies with me. It was a great time.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. And this actually, I have just enough time to mention this. This is the last episode of Pride, and it's been exhausting, so I'm taking July off. Some of, if not all of July. So if you were listening to this in July and you're wondering, when is there another episode coming out? The answer is not in July. July of 2020, I should say, because things on the internet live forever. All right. Well, thanks again, folks. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in August.
Ta-ta.
Bye.